felt the limitations of the lenses. And so I bought the camera, and immediately I was sort of like, oh, what? Oh, well, it is actually currently up for sale.
While Lumix has plenty of cameras out there, in this episode, we're going to be diving into some of the cons with Lumix cameras, and while still enjoying the L mount might be a better investment for the future. And in today's episode, that's going to be joining me is Guy, aka the Savage Filmmaker. He has an entire YouTube channel giving and sharing his own heated opinions towards Lumix cameras and other camera brands in general, saying what they kind of need to hear. So without further ado, Guy, what's up, man?
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. The first official Panasonic owner hater to be on your podcast.
Yeah, man. I feel like I have to have people that love the cameras and that don't love the cameras but still use the cameras, or just L mount in general.
Yes.
I feel like you have to hear both sides of it to give an actual proper opinion.
Yeah. So and I appreciate you doing this. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, man. So, briefest intro. I gave you the briefest. Can you just share to my audience just a little bit of context and kind of like who you are, what you do, and just everything in between like that?
Sure. My name is Guy Pigden, the Savage Filmmaker on YouTube, and I have been making movies for 20 odd years as a sort of writer-director. I've made a couple of feature films. I've made a couple of feature documentaries. My day-to-day work, I have a production company, Campfire Studios, which I co-run with my producing partner, and we do all sorts of different things, but corporate stuff generally. So like video production of various sizes. We do documentary work. We do sort of corporate branding. We do events. We do sort of like run the gamut of like all the kind of stuff you could imagine we do. We do vertical. We do all that sort of thing, and that's what I do, I guess, in between trying to gear up for these big films. That's my sort of, I guess, background.
As at the end of the day, cameras are kind of just tools and not necessarily like they're the end all be all. At the end of the day, you pick the right tool for the right job. Now, looking over, doing my own research for this entire episode, you shot on a ton of different cameras from Blackmagic, Canon, Sony, and now Lumix. Can you just kind of explain, as a warm-up question before diving fully into it, what is kind of your current camera journey from different brands? You don't have to get so specific, but maybe like, hey, I've shot on a couple like this, a couple like that. And then what is your current camera setup that you're using for most of your projects right now?
Absolutely. So I've sort of, again, used almost every different brand of camera. And my sort of journey with Lumix started with the Panasonic S5. And I got that primarily as a vlogging camera. And I sort of, honestly, I didn't know what I had at the time. I kind of undervalued it almost. And I was using it. I had actually a big film festival to attend back in 2022. And I purchased the S5 purely to vlog the whole experience because it was like this big festival. I wanted to capture the whole thing. And I didn't have a small camera because prior to that, I've been using Canon C200, Canon C300, and sort of different Blackmagics, which I still have as well. So, in my studio right now, I have the Blackmagic 6K full frame. I have the Panasonic S1 II currently, and the Panasonic S1H. But right up until, I guess, about a month ago, for the corporate work that I do, I was using Sony cameras. So I was using the Sony A7S III and the Sony A7 IV. And so I'm a flip-flopper. I really do have no allegiance. I'm just looking for the best tool for the best job. Corporate stuff obviously lends itself to smaller file sizes, autofocus, all those kind of conveniences and luxuries that fast turnaround stuff is very, very helpful for. And I guess right now, I've just actually shifted like fully away. So all my Sonys are gone now. I just sold my A7 IV yesterday, for my daily video production work, if it's not Blackmagics in the studio doing podcast work, then it's the S1 II and the S1H. But yeah, very broad sort of range of cameras.
And I feel like I'd be curious to hear kind of your perspective on an advantage, but also the disadvantage of seeing yourself join the L Mount Alliance. I know with Sony, you have what I've been hearing and kind of calling the Venice effect, whereas you have the Venice, the top dog, and then you can kind of trickles down from the FX9, FX6, FX3. Then you have the Sony A7S III, you have the ZV-10, like everything that's E mount, but you're kind of stuck into one camera brand and one camera brand ecosystem. So whatever features they give you is what you have. Meanwhile, L Mount Alliance, love to hear your kind of thoughts, advantages, disadvantages of you seeing yourself invested into that right now.
Well, I think it's changed a lot actually, because when I originally got the S5 back in 2022, I felt the limitations of the lenses. There weren't that many. They had some coming out. There weren't that many third party. Again, it was all kind of in a state of flux. They had all these announcements like it's all going to come together and we're going to see all these different lenses, but it just hadn't quite happened yet. Whereas Sony obviously have the advantage. Actually, I could care less about G Masters. I sold my G Masters for like cheap Viltrox lenses, but there's just so many third-party lenses and cheap third-party lenses, cheap good third-party lenses, and so you definitely feel like. And obviously, I had a couple of like my sort of go-to zooms, which I always use, and that does sort of dial you in. I definitely felt that where the kind of the Sony started to lock me into the ecosystem of E-mount, and L-mount was sort of like, I would just love if I had a few more options here, which now in 2025, they've really upped their game. Panasonic has obviously come out with a bunch of great first-party lenses, but then there's also a lot more really good third-party lenses too. So to me now, I feel like there's a lot less of a difference, except maybe I guess in the premium line, there's not that many, I guess, really premium Lumix lenses, whereas Sony has all their 500 G Masters.
I feel like Sigma has some like good like f1.4 lenses that they have.
Yes.
And I own prediction is once Lumix kind of gets their stuff figured out with like the main lineup of cameras, from like their S9 to like whatever an S1H Mark II would potentially look like, I feel like then I'm at least hopefully they'll start focusing on like the pro side of lenses, like the 50 mil f1.4 Pro that they currently have. Now, kind of, do you personally enjoy the ability more to be able to switch brands easier instead of like having to, like, for example, like you just did, sell all your Sony gear, sell all your lenses to have to buy bodies and buy lenses for a whole different ecosystem? Now it's just, oh, I'm done with Lumix, I'm going to Blackmagic.
Yeah, well, look, that is the beauty of L-mount now, is that as soon as Blackmagic adopted L-mount, I was like, oh, hold up. This makes things way more interesting because, and there was a bit of sort of derision at the time of like, oh, L-mount, they went to L-mount, but it's like, well, actually, now we can kind of enjoy those conveniences of what Panasonic offer in those smaller bodies, or the kind of higher bitrate, sort of more cinema style bodies and stuff that Blackmagic offers, and we don't have to swap things up. And I love that, and that was part of my sort of recent shift is like I just bought the 24 to 60
f2.8.
Yes, and the 35 to 150 Samyang, and the and a couple of the Sigma contemporary lenses as well, because I can use them now on my two favorite or preferred systems, that being Blackmagic and Panasonic. Now, to be honest, I've actually kept some of my Sony lenses with the idea that I will be able to sort of maybe get another body down the line or something like that. But that sort of ability to kind of switch between Blackmagic and Lumix is actually really awesome. And so, part of my sort of strategy is like, man, if Panasonic frustrate me too much, I can just hop over the ditch to Blackmagic sort of whenever I want, and when maybe they introduce some of the the features more completely, like autofocus and stuff like that. Because I did used to shoot a lot of corporate work on my Blackmagics, and while that was great, like visually speaking, obviously, file sizes are crazy, so you're doing a conversion afterwards always, and there's just like, it's those conveniences, man. And when you're trying to shoot very quickly and you're like, oh sorry, I misfocus, oh sorry, could you just do that again, like all of that stuff, clients don't really understand that why they have to do that, and the less you can do of that, the better. And so also low light Blackmagics aren't as good in low light. And when you're walking into these situations, these offices and stuff like that, sometimes the lighting is horrible and you can't do setups and stuff for it. So all of those things kind of steered me to sort of thinking more about Lumix and L mount, I guess.
I feel like with the Blackmagic ecosystem, there's so much to love about it, but it's like not having an H.265 format or like having some type of B-log format.
No, well, I'm going to make a whole video about that, because one of the biggest mistakes they've made is abandoning, like, I guess, ProRes, but it's more like just abandoning something other than B-raw, because the truth is we all do need those smaller codecs. And I shot a documentary all on Blackmagics, and the footage is amazing, but it was such a nightmare. At the end of each day, I was transferring over a terabyte of footage if we were shooting interviews that day, and it was just a very painful process. Obviously it made, we spent a lot more money on hard drives, and it's like, I'm very glad that I did that for the look, but if we'd just had that H.265 codec or something like that, it's like we can use the interviews and shoot, because we're controlling the lighting and stuff there. We don't need all that dynamic range. We don't need I guess the thickness of that codec. We don't actually need that in those controlled environments. We only need it when we go out to do the B-roll and when we want to make things look really pretty. But like the interviews themselves, which were 500 gig per camera at least, is sort of not ideal. So I really think that that's something that's fundamentally missing right now in terms of their Blackmagic strategy of like, oh, B-raw is a great, and B-raw is compressed. It's like, yeah, it's compressed, but it's still massive.
No, I think it's like, I had a friend talk to me once. He's like, oh, I'm thinking about getting the Pixis 12K, but then I'm like, okay, what about the storage and the footage? Like, how are you going to afford that? Because it's like, you can't like have all this beautiful stuff and all this beautiful footage and not afford the storage. And he's like, well, my clients are going to pay for it. But I'm like, in today's day and age, I feel like most filmmakers in the industry who are actually working in the video production world right now is like knowing, all right, clients want more deliverables. They want they want things to be done faster, and they want to do it for less money. So it's like, those two things don't make a lot of sense when you need to shoot it all in RAW. And then if you're not a colorist, or you're not hiring out a colorist, you're going to get some flexibility. Well, you are getting flexibility in the workflow, like with being able to bring back stuff just in case you personally messed up. But if you don't mess up, you're probably getting like 80 to 85% of the exact same look between shooting an H.265 versus versus B-raw Kodak, in terms of that, if you're not a professional colorist at the end of the day, or not pushing the colors as much as you want to create a specific look or style. I feel like transitioning just a little bit, because we're talking about Blackmagic a lot. They have definitely a lot of great things, and I think the reason they have to stick in B-raw, from what I've heard, for if anyone is interested in this part, you might be interested as well, is they're not able to produce the same video specs if they did an H.265 option. So like, to get 12K open gate, it has to be B-raw, and it can't be like H.265 because of the codec. That's a whole other thing. But transitioning on, Lumix. You did an entire episode talking about things you should know about Lumix cameras, especially the Lumix S1 Mark II. Yes. What are some of the flaws? I'd love to just kind of dive straight into it. Some of the flaws that you see with this new flagship camera. Spicy opinions.
Absolutely, only. Absolutely. Well, look, I kind of bought the Lumix based on the kind of the YouTube narrative around how good it was. And I was like, damn, yeah, man, Lumix has arrived. The couple of things I didn't like about the S5 2X, looks like they've fixed all that, and they've offered so many great things that I would really love to leverage, that this is a no-brainer. I've got to just jump right in. And so I bought the camera, and immediately I was sort of like, oh, what? Like, this isn't exactly what I feel has, no one sort of dived into these things. And I wasn't even really planning to do a review of the camera. But then I was just like, I just don't think these things have been covered enough by anyone about the camera. And, my first sort of thing was like, is this oversharpening still there? Because the reason I got rid of my S5 2X was the oversharpening. That was ultimately, I love the look of the S5 or the S1H. I find them very pleasing and smooth, and there was just something throwing me about the S5 2X. And then I sort of started seeing this kind of discourse around the oversharpening, and I was like, yeah, why? I just took this video with my iPhone, and I've just framed the same shot with my S5 2X. It shouldn't look this similar. And so I originally got rid of my S5 2X and got an old S5. But I thought, like, surely they're going to be addressing this. Obviously, there's issues with how they leverage their autofocus, and I think that's the big problem.
I think that was the big transition point.
Exactly. And it's like, and obviously every normal person will just be like, hey man, I'd way prefer good autofocus than if it's a little bit sharper or not. Like, come on, just chill out, bro. And I get that, but I want both. I don't want to go backwards with the image to get autofocus. It's like you have to pay as much attention and respect to making that image, because that's what made Panasonic better than Sony, in my opinion, was how it rendered an image. Was just less digital looking, more cinematic, as we love to say, than Sony cameras. And I love that about Panasonic. And so they lost that in that transition. And I thought maybe S1 II they got it back on further inspection. I don't think they got it back with the S1 II. And I think what's a little concerning about the oversharpening thing is that it's inconsistent. It does not present itself always when you're filming. It really depends on the conditions. It really depends on, what the light's doing. And obviously, I've been doing a whole bunch of tests. It depends a little bit on which codec you're using as well, or it seems to again sort of present. And there's just those weird things like that. I can't look at an image and, like, I talked about it sort of creating these like over enhanced eyes, anime eyes, because it just looks very weird to me. And I don't like, I've got an iPhone. I think iPhones are great, but I don't want my true camera kind of having similarities with it. So that was my first issue, was the oversharpening is still not fixed. And then my second thing was, I found that the autofocus was really underperforming versus my Sony. And I was looking at, I was like, on my first first I hired the camera and I tested it over a weekend before thinking about whether I was going to buy it. And in those tests, I was like, the autofocus is not great, not on Sony level. And but I was like, it's probably me, because I don't use autofocus all the time, and certainly not on Panasonic. So I never used to use autofocus. So I actually I watched your videos on autofocus and a few other people's, and I was like, okay, let's say this first one was user error. I took it over and I tried to dial in my settings, and I was still getting a lot of issues. And I think there's nothing. The autofocus is just like, I just don't think it's close to Sony, at least in terms of what I was doing. Like, with my Sony cameras, I just hit record. I don't do eye plus face. I don't do, oh well, you had it on, open area, but you know, like all these that you just got it wrong. It's like, well, I don't need to get anything wrong or right. I just hit record and it just, you know, it's very intuitive. And I just think that the S1 II for me, I was like, oh man, like now autofocus is a problem for me again, whereas before it was just something I didn't have to think about. So those were my two sort of fundamental sticking points. I did find that, you know, like there was also, you know, I had some issues with the freezing when I was using the exporting out to B-RAW, recording externally, that type of thing. And I did have one issue where the camera just stopped recording mid-interview, but I would fully attribute that to my problem because I was using a third-party battery, and it does say if you use a third-party battery that those types of things can happen. So I feel like that one's on me for sure. But it's kind of like those combination of things. I was like, oh, like, because I also want to be very clear that like there's some amazing stuff about the S1 too. Like there's some awesome stuff too. So I don't want to like, and what I hope I was presenting in my sort of coverage of it is like, hey man, there's some really awesome stuff here. Like, you know, class leading, ahead of the game, ahead of the curve stuff that all cameras need to, you know, employ. But then there's just some other problems too. And then obviously we have, which again, I personally haven't experienced, but something that is a real concern and I think is growing as a concern is that overheating.
Yeah, I would love to kind of deep dive and kind of break each one of those apart.
Yeah.
Just share some of my thoughts as well.
Absolutely.
I think starting off with the over-sharpening, I do think it's interesting because I think I said this in my GH6 versus GH7 video when I did a versus video of those two cameras. I said I preferred the GH6 look because it was softer, it's more warmer, it's more natural than the GH7. Personally speaking, I know when I pit up the S5 to the S1 II, I prefer the S1 II time and time again. I'm using something called opaline filters, which are basically like white diffusion or white mist filters. So it softens the image entirely. That's what I use for all of my shoots. It's about a 1/16 or 1/8. Right now on YouTube, I typically use 1/4 the diffusion. And I do also know that Kolari or Kohler that just made the clip-in filters. I don't know if you've seen that. So they have the mist filters, which look super sick that I want to test out. But they're also working on OLPF filter that'll be able to drop in and clip in so you can have that type of softness to the image. I will say, personally speaking, and maybe it's because I'm conditioned to it, potentially, I've preferred that the S1 II image over the GH6 image from the softness feels a little bit close enough for me. But I do have two thoughts on that, and that might be, this sounds, don't take this wrong, but this might be a generational mindset shift where I think people similar my age and younger prefer slightly sharper images over softer images. But I only think that is due to the fact of social media and how it's affecting our minds as a whole separate other side note.
But honestly, dude, that's a great point, and it's something that I maybe don't consider enough. But I do think, like, even when I got the A7 IV, initially I was like, oh, it's so sharp. I love the crispness of it. But I then slowly grew to hate it. that sort of that digital look. And like honestly, it's like, you know, what world do you come from? Because I've also had clients with a similar thing where I've you know, softened the image. I've tried to make it look very visually pleasing, and they're like, this I'm wanting something like the iPhone, you know, the iPhone look, and I'm like, oh, that's the opposite of what I want to kind of achieve. So I absolutely point taken, and I do want to say that like over sharpening is something that will bother some people a lot, like me, and other people will be like, what are you talking about, dude? It's, you know, like, that's good. It's crisp. I love it. So, you know, it's really where you sit on that, you know, so totally take your point there.
No, yeah, for sure. And I think that's where I'm in the middle ground where it's like, I know personally speaking, I love like in like setups like this, I love having my light being diffused. I love having this like softness to the overall image. So it is funny. It's like, and I think this is generally across the board with most mirrorless hybrid cameras these days. A lot of people that are in the filmmaking space are dirtying up the image in a sense, making it softer. Meanwhile, though, I know for also a lot of client projects, I have to pick and choose when I'm going to do that, because if I'm doing it manually on camera, there's no take backs. Luckily, I know DaVinci Resolve is starting to come out with some really powerful tools for diffusing things. So it's like, it, I love some of them and they look good sometimes, but sometimes they don't look good and it looks a little too fake. So it's kind of like the playing around, figuring out that.
Yeah, it's when it sort of gets into that sort of unnatural, yeah, uncanny valley sort of almost AI, and I think that's probably what's going on, is that there's a lot of noise reduction and a lot of AI sharpening triggered at certain points specifically to assist in better focus. But I'm really speculating. But that's the vibe I get. So yeah.
To I guess to the next point that you were mentioning
Yeah.
that I thought was interesting was the autofocus.
Yeah.
Now again, like you said, it's like, and I've said this in Texas, a lot of our creators and I were talking about this, like, okay, now that you have human, you have animal, you have plane, you have train, you have car, you have motorcycle, and then on top of that you have okay, are you focusing on the front of the side or on the side of the car? Are you focusing on the face and the eye? Or are you focusing on the entire body? Okay, and then you move it a step further. Are you doing full area? Are you doing object tracking? Are you doing one area? I get it. For most people, if you pick up a Lumix camera without having the mindset of contrast-based Lumix autofocus, it makes it so hard to get like usable autofocus. For me, I have only two settings I change from when I'm doing stuff. Majority of the time, I'm on full human body because it'll do the face and eye, and then I'll switch between either full area or I'll do single point area and just have those be my two settings, and I'll hide all the other autofocus settings. And then it's like if I need to focus on a certain area, I'll just touch the screen. It's only going to focus in that one box, and it's probably like 95% of the time it sticks and never loses. But when you want to have full area, track whatever it wants, sometimes, yeah, like I was filming in my living room and it was thinking my couch was a human. And I was like, listen, my couch ain't a human. Like, totally get
Well,
it if you don't know that. Go for it.
Well, one question: do you
Yeah.
use confirmation? Like someone mentioned that you like thumb confirmation on the joystick for if there's like multiple people in frame.
Most of the time, if there's multiple people in the frame, what I'll end up doing is I'll do single area,
Yeah.
hit that box over there, because my joystick is set to function buttons instead.
I see.
Yeah. So I'll pivot that to that area, and then when it locks on that person, depending on the movement, I'll either half press my shutter, and that creates a green box around their face, and it'll lock
Right.
on them. If I'm moving forward, it'll lock the autofocus like distance. But if I'm moving side to side, that means if objects move in front of the autofocus point, it won't push the autofocus point to the hand or to another person, and it'll stay on that person. And then when that area or box is cleared, it'll go back to that person if I like unpress the half shutter.
Nice. Well, yeah. I mean, I would say probably my biggest autofocus issue is it jumping between subjects.
Right.
When there's more, and I think that that's very even for myself. It's like the YouTuber testing method, which is one person rolling around in frame, going forward, going back, up, down, jumping into frame. It's like, yes, it can do that very well. It's the problem is when you introduce multiple parties that it starts losing it, or it was for me anyway. But yeah.
I think some type of like auto detection. I think like the touch tracking, if they had a better touch tracking similar to Sony, I think that's like would be a no-brainer, because that's how most people are used to autofocus working. I know myself when I've shot projects on the FX3 and not FX6, but FX3s,
Yeah.
I would like touch and it would be a massive crowd, and I didn't feel like I had any control of like, okay, I need to dial in this to focus on this one area. And then it felt like, okay, I pressed that and then it would just randomly jump to other people. And I'm like, I have no, like,
Yeah.
I think it just takes time to figure out that part. But I think the last part you mentioned was the reliability, which I definitely 100% agree. I know in my video, I tested it in a 90-degree studio and I was like, all right, I'm going to put this to the test, see if expressed IP card didn't work, said that in the video, put the SD cards, and I got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm running 32-bit flow audio. I want an SD card. I was running for like an hour and a half until the camera battery died, HDMI, and then I never took in account to the sun because of course, it's like you go that far at that point, you're like, I got the results. What else do you want from me? And then you're like, oh, sure, the sun is a whole different other beast. Um, Now, personally speaking, I'd be curious to hear if you have experienced overheating since. But I know, personally speaking, on professional sets, I haven't experienced, and I filmed in like open gate 60 frames a second for a 6 hour shoot, all in a studio that was like 80 degrees.
Yeah. Well, I think this is my biggest worry. So, no, I haven't experienced overheating, but it's winter here. And so, even outside in the sun, it's not that hot. And even when I went over to, a tropical island to film this little mini doc, it was actually not, it was just very nice conditions, but it wasn't super hot. And I think, my worry is like, because we're seeing these tests come out now, whereas it used to be like, well, it's just if you use the CF Express card, it's going to overheat, and it's just if you shoot an open gate, and you don't have to worry if it's at 24. But now people are coming out with tests where it's like, I was filming it with the SD card, and I was filming in 4K, 24, and it overheated in, 12, 15, 20 minutes. And I think that is like a real critical issue because, ultimately obviously you can, and this is the thing, if you go, well, I don't have to worry about that because I shoot only in the studio. Well, you don't have to worry about that, and it's probably not something to really stress about. But like, for me, I film in every type of condition. I do heaps of studio work, but I also do, heaps of, outside work, event work, all sorts, in all types of climates. And it's like, man, I don't think you can make a camera that has the capability to potentially overheat in that, 15, 20-minute thing, if it's particularly sunny. Like, I feel like that's a critical flaw. And I've given Blackmagic a very hard time in the past about their sort of reliability issues as well. I had my original 6K Pro shut down on me in the middle of a shoot, which was like terrifying. And I've had the Ursa Mini G1 have all sorts of issues with like dead pixels, just almost ruining a short film. And so I really value that, but I think a lot of us do really value that. Like, well, that's a non-negotiable, and it's the reason that, for instance, my A7 IV never became my A cam, because I was like, it hasn't overheated on me. Well, it has now, but back then it never overheated on me. But I can't trust that it never will in these kind of critical moments,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know there's been lots of different tests out there with like putting white skins on it, having the little stupid umbrella.
Yes, the umbrella
different
test.
different things like that. And I know I've said in a couple podcasts, but I'll say it again. I personally wish that they've like, I'll show the camera, then I'll show you. I wish that they had the body extended just like this much for this is the end of the screen, and then it does the whole flip out stuff. Because then it makes this just a little bit thicker to add a little bit more airflow in the camera. Obviously, that's kind of, thinking what they could have done in the past. And now it's like, okay, well, if they make a Mark III, they could have fixed that and things like that. So I guess kind of as we start landing the plane for this episode, curious to kind of hear your perspective on what features you do like with the Lumix camera, since you are ultimately keeping this camera, correct?
Oh, well, it is actually currently up for sale. Now, I don't know if it's gonna let's say it's tentatively up for sale. I don't know if it's gonna sell because again, the other problem with it, especially over here, is like Lumix doesn't necessarily sell well even in the secondhand market, and I don't want to lose heaps of money on it because I only just bought it. But it is up for sale, so there is a potential that there is no more S12, but it is currently, what I'm using daily, and but that's where I'm sitting on it. I'm sort of like, but I will also say that if it does sell, I'm just going to use another Panasonic. I'll actually probably just downgrade back to the S5 II. So it's not. I'm certainly, and I've always got the S1H, which is actually my favorite Panasonic camera. But I do want to talk a little bit about what I love about it. So I love the B-RAW options on it. The B-RAW options to record externally are amazing. You can do 60 frames per second open gate in B-RAW. That's a really big deal. And you can do 120 frames with a crop, which is also but not just a Super 35 crop, which is also really good. So I've loved those B-RAW outputs. I love the image stabilization on it. That's good in all Panasonics, but obviously, they just keep making it better and better. And as someone I like to use vintage lenses, and I like to use long zooms for the dock work, and that really that comes in clutch when you're shooting handheld. It really does. And it's way better than Sony's. So those two things, and obviously the range of shooting options just in general is amazing. I do, the 120 frames per second does look great. And it's cool that they're sort of getting into that now with less of a crop. And the 32-bit float, I used that on an event, and it was just relieved all the stress, because I was that we had speakers that were louder and quieter. We had performances that were super loud, and I didn't have to do anything. I just hit record, and that is a beautiful thing. So that 32-bit float DMW XLR2 attachment is really, really good. Again, better than the Sony one. I would much prefer it in a handle. I really think they should make a handle extension for it. I feel like that would be so good if they just made it, because Canon read the manual, they read the blueprint, they just copied Sony for the C50, and sometimes it's okay to copy people's homework because the Sony design is not great because the handle's too short.
Right. So I like the handle design on the C70.
Yes.
No, you're good. I was just saying it's copy my homework, but change some of the answers.
Exactly. But I've got a few better answers, shall we say? And so that, but I really did love that. So there are a lot of great things about the camera, that I really did enjoy. For me, it's just, and I guess fundamentally I was sort of I was looking for a better image than the S1H. This is, it's all subjective, right? But it wasn't a better image for me yet. And obviously that OLPF thing is again, this is my theory on it, but it's I think they could have included that. They didn't, because they wanted to make the autofocus better. And I think that would have hurt their autofocusing if they'd put that in with the way they're doing it now. That's, again, just a theory. It's not, but I feel yes, we need OLPF, and that is missing too. So those are my sort of what I'd like to see. But like I said, there is a lot to love about the S1 too. And, I'm certainly not suggesting there isn't. Yeah.
Thank you for joining this episode. I have one more final question to kind of wrap it all up. But before we kind of do that, where can you have the people check you out? Where do you want to send all of them?
Oh, yeah, man. Look, just check me out on Savage Filmmaker YouTube, where I try and kind of present slightly more critical reviews, perhaps. I don't think that's a bad thing. S1, Panasonic need to hear people being hey man, I'm not happy about this, and this is why, as well as saying, hey man, I really love this stuff, but you can't just have it all the good stuff, because then you don't kind of refine and revise. And also, these are all just companies. These are all companies that are taking our money. So in exchange, we now got to have expectations around that, and that's okay too. So, but yeah, please, the Savage Filmmaker on YouTube is where people can find it.
So my last final question for you today in this episode is going to be, what would Lumix need to come out with? Features kind of like internal RAW features, reliability, autofocus. What would they need to come out with for you to decide for a future cinema camera from Lumix? What would they need to fix with that?
Yeah, look, man, that's the other thing is like, I think there's been a lot of discourse around, hey, this is great, but can't wait for the S1H2. And I agree with that. Like that would be great. I feel like from Panasonic's point of view, they're like, this is the S1H2. Like you think there's something else coming, there's nothing coming. Now, again, that's kind of what I was told through the grapevine of, my local camera store talking to their Panasonic rep. We don't actually know, and there's a lot of speculation. I would love to see the S1H2. What does that mean? No issues with overheating. That's just number one. Boom. OLPF goes in, we lose that digital sharpness, and we just have that beautiful, creamy S5, S1H magic sauce that they were nailing it, man. They were killing it. And I would just love to kind of see them sort of go back, but obviously keep those autofocus features. So those would be the things for me. But I also want to say, like, they're doing heaps of things right already. Like, this is, if it wasn't for the reliability thing and like that over sharpening, it's like, oh, sorry, man, no notes. You really nailed it. And it's just, those are the sticking points for me.
If you guys are interested in seeing another episode talking all about the future of Lumix, check out that episode right there. YouTube recommends you might like this episode right here. Till next one, guys. Peace.